So good afternoon, everybody. I am delighted to be part of this virtual Féile and Football Festival. And it's a real pleasure to be doing this as the interim mental health champion. And talking about something that's actually really important right now, that's really relevant, not only in my role as champion, but is something that we're all going through at the minute, is the uncertainty of the COVID-19 pandemic. And what that has done to us. So I'll be covering a wee bit of that there. And the title of my lecture today is Nurturing Our Mental Health in Uncertain Times. And as I say, my name is Siobhan O'Neill. I'm the interim mental health champion. I'm also a professor at Ulster University. And I'm coming to you here today from my home office up in the mountains outside Dungiven, out in a place called Craigban in County Derry. So it's great to be here and it's great to be part of this. So I hope you enjoy the lecture, maybe get something out of it. And I'll link in with you afterwards and do some Q&As and hear what your thoughts are and what I'm saying about this. So the lecture today is going to cover 4 different areas. I'm going to start by talking about the pandemic and what it's meant for us, and I think that's an important context for this. And then I'm going to be framing it as a stress, and for some of us it's been a trauma, and how we cope with stress and trauma. And in there I'll go on a wee bit to our history of trauma in Northern Ireland. A lot of people here and a lot of you who are watching will be familiar with trauma and will have suffered yourself. I'm going to talk about the possibility of growth as a result of trauma and stress and pressure. And again, it's not about growth as something that absolutely must happen, but I think there's things that have happened in this pandemic that can allow us to view the world in a different way, and that might introduce possibilities that we'd never thought about before. And then finally, we've got our Q&A. So starting with the grief, loss, trauma and COVID-19, a deadly virus. So for me, certainly, whenever the news first came out about this pandemic, and particularly lockdown, what was required, what we all had to do to keep ourselves safe and to keep other people safe, this was hugely stressful. I was really stressed out for about a fortnight, I have to say. There was a fear for me personally, keeping ourselves safe, the fear around that, I think was very strong. I have a history of pneumonia, and many of the people that were very dear to me had ongoing physical health conditions that meant that they might have been more at risk. So there was that kind of, are we going to be safe? Is this a threatening thing for us right now? And then about others, that people that we loved, worrying about them as well. And of course, that's something that's slightly outside of our control. So we had this situation with the pandemic where people weren't adhering to the guidelines, and there was lots of debate about what people are doing to keep themselves safe, and how much of that we take on. That's a choice that we need to make as well, but we can't stop worrying about other people. And now as we do this, as I'm recording this, there's discussion about whether people should wear a face mask and about the safety of going out without wearing a face mask and different rights there. So keeping other people safe and keeping ourselves safe is continuing to be an issue here. With the lockdown, it certainly brought me a feeling of isolation, and I was cut off from a lot of the things that were really important to me. The contact with my family and friends. So I'm a single mother, I live with my child, so that loss of contact was huge. The communities that I worked within, every day I saw lots of people, and all of a sudden that had just stopped in the space of a couple of days over St. Patrick's week there. I wasn't able to see people unless on a computer screen or a phone screen. Really, really difficult. And loss of the connections. So it wasn't just meeting people, it was being able to connect with them, and that serves a really important function psychologically, and we had lost that. And for many of us, it's those connections that give our lives purpose and meaning. It's those connections that we have with our family and our friends that we have through work that really our reason for living. So to swipe all that away over the space of a few days was really, really harsh and really, really stressful for us. Most of us had some degree of change to our daily routines. There was things that we could no longer do. Simple things like going to the shop were a huge issue. and our work and our social lives were disrupted there. And routine is really important for psychological well-being. That uncertainty and shifting routines is destabilizing and it's stressful. The isolation itself causes stress. We miss the contact, we miss the physical contact. So much evidence now that touching people produces physical responses that help soothe us, that help calm us. So if you think of a pandemic, we were going through this sort of very stressful situation, worrying about everything, feeling threatened, and we weren't able to do the things that would have helped us, the touch, the hugs that work physically, physiologically, that release chemicals that counter that calm us down. And then for many of us, there was the impact of losing loved ones. There were huge numbers of deaths in Northern Ireland, possibly not as many as we had expected, but the numbers were still massive, and that's a great tragedy for the population. And the loss of health for others, people who survived COVID, people who had other health conditions that weren't managed, all those cancelled operations, you know, that's affecting people's health too. And then now we have the economic fallout and the loss of livelihoods. So people were plunged into destitution as a result of this pandemic. People that were only aged were living in poverty, and had lost everything. Businesses that were surviving and then had to go under. These are huge stressors. And then witnessing the broader impact in the communities that we live in, even if we haven't been affected ourselves, we're bearing witness to that because we see it, we experience it. And if you're a very empathic individual, or even if you just focus a lot on the news, you're going to experience that, and you're going to have some degree of suffering with those other people. So the witnessing, the bearing witness to suffering has been really sore on us. And then there's the guilt if we don't do that, if we do attempt to switch off. Some people have talked about this feeling that, you know, they felt they needed to know more about it and to learn what people were going through and to understand more of that. You know, and that's actually not an obligation. We do have to look after ourselves. And then globally, I mean, if we looked at what was happening in other countries, as I did a lot at the start, because we thought that's what was going to happen here, you know, that was really, really difficult to think that those countries had suffered so much and that we might get the same. And of course, now we have this period of uncertainty. We initially thought, well, I initially thought there's a virus. We're going to have to lock down for a while until it goes away, and then we'll find a vaccine and all will be well. Now we realise actually this virus is going to be with us for quite a long period of time, and we're all going to have to take measures to protect ourselves, you know, going into months, maybe even years ahead. So that uncertainty is really difficult to cope with. And whilst we're trying to make plans to get back to normal, we're talking about a new normal that will always have that threat, certainly until we get a vaccine, but that threat will be there of second waves and local lockdowns and things as well. So that uncertainty is really, really difficult for us to cope with. So I've concept as a psychologist, I think, well, what's the best way of framing this? So I'm framing it as a stressor and a lot of losses. So, and loss itself brings stress, but there's stress of worry and all, and protecting ourselves too. So that's stress as well. And it's really useful to think about what happens when we go through stress and what happens when we have a loss, when we have a significant loss. So starting with loss, this is a model called the Kubler-Ross grief cycle, and it's been used for years to help us understand the grieving process. And it's actually really useful, I think, to help us understand what's happening in this pandemic and what's happening with the various different losses around this pandemic. So this model has been criticised, of course, and it's not completely perfect. And whilst I've presented it as a nice wee line there, it's actually different. You know, people move back and forward and can move to different stages at different times. And with a pandemic, we have different types of losses. So we may be at different parts of this for different things, if you know what I mean. But nonetheless, it helps us understand the processes that we're going through, and nearly the processes that we need to go through in order to come out the other side of this mentally well. So taken just at the far left-hand side there to start with, denial is something that that a lot of us are familiar with. So at the start of the pandemic, I really was one of those people who said, this is a mild flu, we're overreacting, let's just behave as if everything is normal. And that's a very natural reaction, and maybe that's still happening because people are reluctant to accept the enormity of this, and the fact that we might need to make changes to our lives for the future, for years and into the future perhaps. So that denial, avoidance, saying it's not happening, let's just pretend it's not happening, that's something that we will do, and a lot of us were there, and many of us maybe are still there, and that's okay. But whenever you're trying to get people to change their behaviour, denial is not a good place to be. We need to try and confront people with that. With the reality of it, which means causing stress to people, saying, no, this is real, this is a threat. So you're giving people that stress. So denial is a place where we're avoiding stress, and that can be a good thing, but it's not appropriate right now because we need people to change their behaviour. The next stage is anger. Anger is very natural and normal too. We want to blame this on somebody. We want to find out who's to blame and make them suffer, so that can make us feel better. And we have the sense that there should be a natural justice, so whoever has caused this needs to suffer. And then we realize actually that there's no simple answers here, and there are people to get angry with, but that may not be so helpful. And certainly anger causes us stress, and it's not good for us psychologically. So we need to find out how to work with that anger, but to know that anger is very normal and natural, and to accept that when it emerges on ourselves. But think about how it's serving us too. I mean, are we doing well with that anger? Is that good for us? Is it making us content? Is it helping us do the things we need to do to meet our broader goals, to look after our family, to be content people? And often then we think, right, we need to get rid of this anger somewhere because it's not serving us. It might be righteous, but it might not be good for us. So it's that balance. And then there's depression, and I for definite was in here with COVID, just overwhelmed with what was going to happen to me and my child, and the huge changes and what they meant for us, and that was just awful. And you do feel kind of hopeless there, and that's normal again. And we need to acknowledge that if that's where we are, and process that in some way, and realize that that's normal, and we can be hostile when we're there, but ultimately again it's not serving us, because it's not allowing us to move to a state where we're content, where we can meet our own goals, which are usually around work, productivity, keeping our family right, you know. So depression is something we need to move through, but it's something that can't be forced. And then after that, or sometimes before that, comes bargaining. We struggle to find meaning. We try and say, well, if we do this, then we'd be okay. Or we try and make compromises around this virus of what we're prepared to give up. So that kind of struggling to find meaning, to work out what is it going to mean for me? What can I get away with personally? And what's the story I have to tell? And then at the end of it all, we do have a level of acceptance where we accept where we are, and we return hopefully to what our core values are, what our life's about, how we continue to find meaning in our lives during this time of a pandemic. So the blue bar at the bottom is really the things that are good at each stage. So at the start, where there's denial and anger, we need information and communication about what the threat is, who's responsible, what we have control over. We need to work all of that out. Sometimes we just need emotional support for the depression, but we just need somebody to say, yeah, this is overwhelming, this is terrible, this is hard. And we need to heal from that. We need to heal from the loss. So it's almost like something has been taken away, and that hole's there, that gap, that wound is there. We need support to help us heal, and then guidance and direction as we're coming out the other end, so that we can think about what this means for our lives and how we can do what we want to do and what gives our life meaning in the context of this pandemic and what's happening. So guidance and direction there is really, really helpful. So this little slide is about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I use this slide as a way of explaining what we need in order to stay stable. Again, it's a really common concept that's used when we're talking about stress and trauma and those sorts of things. And really Maslow's hierarchy of needs starts with that base, that red line at the bottom. We cannot feel safe, and we cannot feel social, and we cannot be productive and do the things we want to do if our physical needs are not met. So we would maybe describe this as getting your base right. So this is our physiological stuff: breathing, sleeping, eating, and even things like sex and sleep and excretion are all included within that physiological base. And whenever that's threatened, we're in a state of extreme stress. And that's why people went out and bought toilet rolls. It was a way of thinking, well, these needs aren't going to be met. I need to stock up on food. I have a larder full of tinned soups and things that I never eat, but it was just that fear of what if there's no food, and no amount of information could persuade me. I just needed to do that. I needed to go out and buy things. So that's why people stockpiled. That's why that's why we were really destabilized at the start. We thought everything was threatened. The next stage up is safety. And that we need to feel healthy and safe, and we need to feel that we're not at risk from the virus, and we need to know that we're doing what we can to keep ourselves safe. So that's the next stage. And then we have the things that sort of add on layers of meaning to our life. We need to find ways of connecting with people that we love. We need to build our self-esteem again. We need that confidence. And then right at the top, we've got morality, creativity, human flourishing, all of those things. But the point of this model is we need to get the physical stuff right. We need to get the safety stuff right. We need those emotional connections. Then we can start to be productive. And a lot of people, and this was common in academia, were trying to move too quickly to do science, to write great pieces, to be really creative whenever they felt under threat. And that's not good. We need to get the base right first, because everything else is influenced by that. And if we don't have our sleeping and our eating and everything correct, if we don't feel safe, if we're psychologically we don't feel safe, then we're not able to learn. We make bad decisions. We get angry easily. We make poor choices. So getting the physiological stuff right is so important. So that's why, even if you go to the doctor and say, I think I might be depressed, I have a mental health problem, often they will check your bloods, they'll check your hormone levels, they'll ask, are you sleeping? What's your diet like? So that all the physical stuff needs to be in place first before the mental health stuff can really be worked with. And even things like therapy often don't work when the person's not sleeping, not eating. It's about getting all of that right first. Another model that's really helpful in terms of understanding stress and COVID is the fight or flight response, the body's response to stress. So mental health and mental illness are really all about how we respond to stress and how much stress we can tolerate and what we do when we're under stress and what our bodies do whenever we're in a situation where we're stressed. So this is a little description of the fight or flight response. It's that feeling that we get when something awful happens and our heart starts to beat. We get kind of breathless, our breathing is affected. We often have things like digestive problems and diarrhea. And it's the body's way of preparing to fight or run away in the face of danger. And it's a really natural, normal physical reaction. And if this is happening, this means your body's working properly. You're responding appropriately because your body's gearing up to fight or run away. But the problem with this physical response is that when it's activated too much, it can change the body's response in a way. It can recalibrate that. It can change the settings and the threshold so that you are more easily activated the more often that this is set off. And then sometimes if it's set off to such a wild degree that you're overwhelmed, then you will shut down, you'll go into a state of freeze. So we sometimes call it fight, flight, or freeze. So fighting or running away, or completely freezing, shutting down. And that can be like a psychological shock or a trauma reaction where the stress is so overwhelming that our bodies just freeze and shut down completely. So this is a normal response, and we've got it because it served our ancestors really well when they were living in environments where they had to fight to run away. So the people that fought and run away that had this, it worked really, really well. They had babies that had it as well. And so they passed it on from one generation to the next. So now we're left with this, but we're in a world where the stressors are actually psychological, or the stress is not a wild animal, it's a virus that we can't see. It's the possibility of losing our job. It's the possibility of losing a loved one. So these are things that we can't really run away from, but we're still left with this physical reaction. And it's that physical reaction that can cause so many problems for us and lead us into mental illness if we can't manage it, if we can't cope with it. So the stress response is normal, and it would have been completely normal for me and you, and the evidence is showing us this in COVID. It's completely normal to have that exaggerated stress response, and we feel that as anxiety. So that racing heart, not being able to sleep, all normal part of the stress response. I remember there was one night my wee 3-year-old would get into bed beside me, you know, at night at times, and she got in beside me one night and then she got out again because I wasn't able to sleep and I was putting her off. So like she was like, I don't want to be in this bed with you anymore. It's not, you know, it's not that warm, nurturing environment, which really just made me think about how this pandemic was affecting me. And I was having nightmares. This stuff was entering my nightmares in really strange ways. And I remember having a nightmare about a rat, you know, on the pillow and everything. So it's really scary, but it is our body and brain's way of reacting and responding to stress. We're staying awake because there's somebody outside, that there's something outside that can attack us. You know, and that's important for our survival. So our body's doing that for a reason, but it feels awful. And if you haven't gone through it before, it can actually feel like you're going mad, because you just feel you can't control, you can't think straight, everything shifts and changes. But this is actually normal. It's called the acute stress response. Sadly, there's so many people in Northern Ireland who have gone through this many times as a result of trauma relating to the Troubles, and just living in persistent poverty and having terrible things happen in our families and communities. So the normal effects of stress are that we will be easily distracted, because remember, we're in high alert here. There's something about to attack us. So it's not going to be easy to concentrate. It's really difficult to learn. I had 3 lectures to do, and God knows how I did it. Like, it's just so hard to focus if you're under pressure, if your body's on high alert. There's the emotional effects. You can't relax, you feel irritable, you're ready for a fight all the time. And that's kind of, it makes sense when you think about it, but it's not good for your family or for your child whenever you're snappy, you know. So that's a normal emotional response. And then there's the physical responses. There can be an increase in energy where we're ready to go into battle, or a decrease in energy where we're conserving energy, where we just want to sleep all the time. And again, these are normal responses because our body's preparing for fight or running away. So it's the body's way of adjusting to this new normal. There's tension in muscles to prepare us to fight, although that can cause back pain and neck pain if that happens a lot. And that's sometimes we talk about where we hold stress. So, you know, until you learn what happens in each muscle, until you understand where it is for you, and relaxation training can help with that. And then you can actually untense those muscles. And once you do that, interestingly, your brain's getting a message that stress is going away. So you're setting up that loop. Feeling restless, sweating a lot, easily startled. Exaggerated startle response is a normal thing, but it can cause problems when it makes us shout or get angry with our families. And then difficulty sleeping, of course, as well, because, you know, if we slept, we would be attacked. So we can't sleep. So the stress response is going to stop us from sleeping. And then it's what we do about that. How do we get ourselves back into what I would call safe and social, from fight or flight to safe and social. And then there's the social aspect of it. We get into arguments. We want to be on our own because we feel under threat. And we want to blame others. We want to know who it is we're supposed to be fighting here. We're looking for the cause of our problems. So these are all normal effects of stress. So there's nothing to be scared of or afraid of. It's just good to know that they're there and they're a sign that our bodies are responding appropriately. But you can see how in the long run, all of these things can be bad for us. At best, they don't serve us very well. So it's worth trying to help acknowledge them for a start, but get rid of them, get ourselves back into a good place so that we can get on with the good stuff. So this is the little diagram I use to explain where all these states are, and I call it the circuits of survival. So right up at the top there, we have our little smiley icon with the sunglasses, safe and social. So this is where we, well, where we were supposed to be in January, where we were calm and engaged and connected, and we could have conversations with people. We didn't have to look over our shoulder all the time. We could be compassionate. We could see other people's perspectives, and we were secure. And that's the good place to be. And that's where we want to be most of the time. And it's a good place for kids to be. They can learn, they can be empathic, they can form relationships. So safe and social is the nice place. But occasionally we'll have to go into fight or flight when something attacks us. So we're moving down this ladder or these circuits. And that's where we become mobilized and vigilant. We get stressed and we maybe shout so that we can be heard. And we want to run away, and our bodies prepare us for running. And we get a bit angry, and sometimes it's good to get angry because we need to get angry in order to fight, to protect ourselves. So again, all very normal, but we want to move right back up again if we can into safe and social fairly quickly after that. So it's not about moving between these states. It's normal to move between them. It's about how quickly we can get back to safe and social. That's really, really important there. The bottom one is shut down, and it is just like somebody switched the off button. And that can happen when something so huge that we can't even contemplate it has attacked us, or when we lose somebody that's very dear to us, or where there's just a sudden death will definitely do this. Even, a sudden relationship breakup, job loss, we can shut down, we can just go, it's just too much for us to cope with. And that again is quite normal. Or if we've been in fight or flight for too long, we can go into shutdown. Or if we're in and out of fight or flight too much, our body's naturally going to shut down. So if we think about a wee kid who's in a home where they're being attacked constantly, either verbally or maybe even physically, and they have to defend themselves, and they're being constantly plunged into fight or flight there, they'll just go into shutdown eventually as a way of coping, with it, and also as a way of protecting themselves. So that's about becoming completely disconnected. And the emotions that occur at that point are around terror and hopelessness. And it's from shutdown, it's very difficult to see a positive future. It's very difficult to even imagine yourself being back and safe and social. And it is a normal response to a huge stressor, and most people can get back up again, but sometimes people need a bit of help coming back up from shutdown. And certainly if you've got a child in shutdown, forcing them into a class, forcing them to learn, forcing them to do anything is not going to work. You've got to get them back up to safe and social again, and to really feel calm and secure. And it's those connections, those emotional connections, that will do that. So the important points to note here, it's that the subconscious perception of danger triggers us to drop down here. So it could be something that we see, something that we hear. It mightn't be a message or a word. It could be a cue from the environment. People with post-traumatic stress disorder can have triggers that are smells, that because their brain has been trained, because this has happened so often, their brain's been trained to go back right down into shutdown or fight or flight. At a slight weak cue, again, it's about the body protecting itself. So whenever there's a smell, the body will go, something's not right. So it's subconscious. So it's something we have control over. It's subconscious, and we feel it in our body. It's our body and brain response. It's not something we can think our way out of. And that's important to note. It's natural and it's physical. So it's a subconscious, a somatic, physical perception of danger, and it triggers a drop down there. And then we move back up. And that process of moving back up is called emotional regulation or self-regulation. And we can teach people how to do it. And we can teach kids how to do it. And we can learn about our own emotional regulation. And we can, through various different therapies and even just a wee bit of insight ourselves, we can understand what causes us to drop down, what are our particular triggers. And they mightn't be the same as other people's. And it's usually about what has happened in our past, things that have happened, particularly in our childhood, but what causes us to drop down those circuits. And then what are we going to do to get ourselves back up again? And a lot of this is within our control, but we need insight and sometimes we need help with it. If we have repeated trauma, it can recalibrate the thresholds for each stage. So there are people who live their lives in fight or flight and shut down, and very rarely go up to safe and social. And it's because of what has happened to them and the number of traumas that they've experienced and the nature of those traumas. And living in a state of persistent anxiety is a bit like that, where you're just never calm and engaged and relaxed. And it really is terrible to think that people are living their lives like that when we can help them. We can, there's lots of therapies, there's lots of things we can do to get back up there. And what I'm showing you here is really the model of trauma-informed practice, or the lens of trauma-informed practice that I'm trying to promote in my role of mental health champion for Northern Ireland, is this idea of the behaviours that we see when people are in fight or flight and shut down are not really them. It's their response, it's their body's response to what has happened to them. So if we're going to be trauma informed, and we should be trauma informed, we need to think not about what's wrong with you. Why is this child not learning? Why are they not able to learn and do their homework? And why is this person not able to function in their job? It's not about what's wrong. It's what's happening. What has happened to you in the past, and what's happened to you right now. What's happening right now that's influencing whether you're angry, aggressive. So the trauma-informed lens is relevant to COVID, but it's relevant to everything in Northern Ireland, because it's about what has happened to you. It's about understanding how the things that have happened in our lives are influencing our behaviour right now, and working with that. So that's a wee bit about trauma-informed. And of course, if you've had a trauma resulting from the Troubles, where you've seen somebody shot, or you've seen awful things, or awful things have happened to you, then this is going to cause you to rearrange your life in a particular way too. And some people in Northern Ireland have post-traumatic stress disorder, which means that they're constantly that bit more hypervigilant, that they have difficulty with emotional connections, because they're if you think of the body's response to stress, those emotional connections aren't really possible then, because you're on the defense. And that can cause problems in families. And really that's where transgenerational trauma is about. It's about the trauma and a parent affecting how they relate to that young person, and then also the trauma in a community that affects the life chances for that young person as they're growing up as well. The good news is, though, there's so much we can do to help people and to make these shifts and to teach people about emotional regulation, particularly children. But through all the stages of our life, we can learn about our own body's responses and our unique triggers, and help move ourselves from one part of this system to another. So the first part of recovery, or of any, before we even talk about growth, is about nurturing ourselves so that we can get back into that safe and social place, and nurturing our communities so that we have communities of people who are acting from a place of safe and social. And I've talked a lot about the links between this stuff and peace building, because empathy is really, really difficult whenever you're in fight or flight or shut down. Whenever you're defensive, whenever you're living your life as if you were going to be attacked all the time, it's very difficult to see other people's perspectives, because you will see others as a threat, and your body's responding in such a way that others are seen as a threat. So peace building is really difficult to do if we're not safe and social. And that's why I think a trauma-informed approach is something that we need to talk more about in Northern Ireland. We need more understanding of this. So, so why nurture? Well, you can't pour from an empty cup. At a very, very basic level, you can't help other people if you're in a state of fight or flight. You're not in the right position to help other people. You need to get yourself right back up to safe and social. And too much stress and not being able to cope with too much stress causes mental illness. We know that. So it's about the amount of stress that we're under. It's also about our capacity to self-regulate and our ability to cope with that stress. There are people who are much more vulnerable than others. So in the time of COVID, if there's somebody who's struggling with an existing mental health problem like anxiety and depression, this is an additional stressor. So I'm thinking here about people who were already living under conditions of poverty. We're already struggling to make ends meet and to put food on the table, and now this. So that's a significant layer of pressure on top for them. And then I also think about carers of people who are sick, or older people who need a bit of extra help. So you're worrying about you and them, and how you're going to manage all of this. And then in this pandemic, we have parents who were trying to work from home, which is difficult and a disruption and a pressure too, and also homeschooling kids, or like I was for a period of time looking after a 3-year-old on my own. I'm a single mother, so she was there in the background and I was trying to do my meetings and keep up with work and support students, and it was just impossible. So it's important to manage your own levels of stress and be aware of the signs of too much stress so that you can get help. Because if you're in fight or flight or shut down, you're not going to be able to see other people's perspectives. You're not going to be able to help other people. You're not going to be able to have good relationships with your family. It's just physically not possible to do that. So we can't set ourselves on fire to keep others warm. And the most important thing that you can do to help other people in your community and your family is actually to look after yourself. And then once you're up and safe and social, you'll be able to have a good view of what other people need and make good decisions there about where to direct your resources. Because we know that's one of the things that gives life meaning, is being able to help other people, and being able to fulfill those roles. And it's so core to our being, whether it's our roles at work, or our roles in the family, or some sort of combination of both. That's actually, when you ask most people what gives their life meaning, that's what it is. And this is what we need to do then to promote that, to allow us to help other people. Okay, so the next little part of this is about how we cope with stress and trauma, and how we get back into safe and social if we're stuck down there in fight or flight, or if we're living with anxiety, or if that anxiety comes too easily for us. So coping in a pandemic, or coping with anything, we're physical beings. We are animals at the end of the day, and it's okay to feel anxious. It's a normal response. So we cannot punish ourselves. We must stop the negative self-talk, and we must think of ourselves as our own friends in a way, and think, well, would you say that to a friend? So dissect your self-talk and know that your physical response is normal. So instead of beating yourself up about it, really actually praise your body for doing a really good job at recognizing that this thing is a problem and responding appropriately. I think there's people who are in denial in that part of it, and that might be actually not a good place to be when you're talking about a deadly virus. So that anxiety is good and it's normal, and all the data from the COVID studies, and there are so many of them, they've all shown this increase in anxiety at the start, and then it does go away after a while. It's a normal response. So self-kindness, self-compassion, absolutely critical. I cannot say this often enough. Do not traumatize yourself with your own self-talk. So the next bit is seek support using creative methods from a range of sources, and sources that are helpful. So this is not your friend who knows everything about everything and has all the conspiracy theories. This is about looking And the Minding Your Head, the PHA website, is really good for this. So looking for sources of support that are going to serve you well, that are designed by, I hate using the word, but experts that will help you with this. Mindfulness can be a part of that. I don't even know if I've mindfulness on later on, but mindfulness can be a good way of helping you understand your own thoughts and how your thoughts influence your feelings, and then helping you self-regulate, move back up that ladder again. So seek support, and it's got to be online, unfortunately, for a lot of us at the minute. So we're going to have to go to the computer, and I know there are challenges, and I'm in the hills here with really bad Wi-Fi. So this is 4G Wi-Fi that I'm doing this on. It's challenging, I know, but that's kind of where we are. Write about your experiences and share them. I find a lot of people find the research is showing when you write things down, it can be really helpful. It's almost like seeing them on paper. It gives you a different view, literally, and you're more easily able to problem solve. So if you can write and share them safely, and posting on social media can sometimes help with that, but sometimes that's a very unsafe way because people will berate you, and you'll get all sorts of responses there. So think about writing your experiences down, and that allows you to reflect on them and understand where you are. Practice gratitude and promote hope. And again, there's evidence that this stuff works. It sounds so cliched. Gratitude diary really, really works. And people who are churchgoers will find that all of the thanks, the prayers of thanks, can be really, really useful as well. When my wee child was born, somebody gave me this diary. It was a 5-year mum's diary, and I thought, oh my goodness, just a line a day. And I didn't really want to do it, but I started doing it, and it's been brilliant, because every day I'm forced into this mindset of gratitude and thinking about the things I'm grateful for, and it really does turn things around. It really, really works. So what are you grateful for? What are you hopeful about? What are your reasons to live? Pictures can be part of that as well. And all of that just shifts us away back into safe and social, away from that anxiety and away from that rumination about things that might happen and might not happen, and we really have very little control over. If media and news create stress, and they did for me, and I did not do this, but you need to control your exposure. And all of the studies again are showing that there's a direct correlation between the amount of news and media and articles that you read and the degree of anxiety that you have. And when you're talking about a virus, you've really got to try and leave it up to other people. You don't need to be an expert in this. All you need to really know is what you need to do to keep yourself safe. And I know there's conflicting guidance and all of that, but getting obsessed with that is not going to serve you well, because you're going to be plunged into that state of stress every time you do that. So really control your exposure. Think about restricting it to a period of time every day. So one news item every day, one news. There's great media in Northern Ireland that you can get the news in the evening there. It's brilliant. So maybe just restrict yourself to that for now. Goal setting is really good. Think about your core values. What do you stand for? What do you believe in? Write them down. Now, what are your goals? What do you want to achieve? Is it just, and for me, it was just about keeping Annabelle safe and social, and making sure things were right for her. And that's a great goal to have. Other people will have goals relating to their communities and their work, and other responsibilities they have. Write them down and think about, well, where are they and what am I doing today that's going to help me achieve those goals. So, and there are small goals that you will achieve on the way to the large goals. So keep thinking about your core values and your goals. They will keep you right. Manipulate your body into safe and social. Now that just sounds really kind of an odd thing to say, but what I'm actually talking about there is when your body's in a state of fight or flight or shutdown, you can actually do things to move it, to make your body behave as if it's in the way that it's designed to behave. So going out for a run is what I have done lots during this pandemic, and that's really, really helpful, because your body's designed to do that, and all the stress response is preparing you to run away. So actually running gets rid of it. And you're telling your body, right, you've had your run now, so that the stressor's gone. So you're manipulating your body always back to safe and social. Exercise, as I say, is brilliant. And that's why it's a really good way of getting rid of the stress physically. There's also things that you can do, like slow, steady breathing, getting your breath back. So again, you're manipulating all of these things that your body has done to cope with the aggressor. You're manipulating those back again into safe and social. And these are the principles of dialectical behavioral therapy. So other things you can do are drink enough water, make sure your diet's right, make sure that you've got your base right there as well. There's muscle movement, relaxation, slow movements can be as effective as the running. It doesn't always have to be about the cardiovascular stuff. And even soothing, repetitive sensory actions. So give yourself a massage. Think about the textures that you're exposed. All of these things, and it sounds so simple, but like, what would you do with a little baby when you're trying to soothe that wee child back down again? Well, you can do that stuff for yourself. So the rocking actions, the touch, everything. Try and recreate that in some way to get you back to a nice safe place. So textures, blankets, weighted blankets can be useful for people as well. Do things that gave you pleasure before this, even if they're not pleasurable right now, or they're not what you feel like doing, do it anyway. So if you used to enjoy meeting a friend, then meet them for coffee, do whatever, force yourself back out there. Fake it until you make it, in some ways, is the motto here. Just try and bring yourself back there, and that can be really helpful as well. Although if you're in a state of depression, I acknowledge is really, really difficult to do that. So I say do things that give you pleasure, but not too much pleasure. The goal is not pleasure seeking, and all of the happiness, positive psychology literature would confirm that that sort of hedonistic stuff is not satisfying in the long run. So yes, have a few glasses of wine if that's what you do and that helps you, but doing that all the time is not going to be good for you. In the long run, and we all know that. So monitor the impact of your stress management strategies on your mental health. So yes, by all means, cook yourself a nice meal and a nice dessert, but if you're taking too much sugar and you're finding it's affecting your mood, and like me, I take too much caffeine sometimes, and then I get irritable and I get headaches and things. So just keep an eye on the things that you're doing and think, how are they serving me? Is that working for me or not? Is that good for me or not? There's lots of impulsive things that we do when we're under stress. Spending too much, gambling, smoking, drinking, doing too many drugs. That might all help us cope and give us that rush of excitement that can help us cope with the pressure that we're under. But ultimately, that's not going to be good for us. So just keep an eye on that. But just be kind to yourself too. There's so much evidence that we've had to do things to cope that aren't what we would normally do, but it's just about that awareness, and ask for help. There's the alcohol charities and the drugs charities are saying that this is an issue. Gambling again has become a problem, so ask for help if this is a problem for you. Other things that will not work is constant worrying about COVID, rumination, thinking about the risks and the possible consequences and all sorts of consequences. And this is very different from preparing, from buying your face masks. This is really kind of an obsessive worrying, and be aware of co-ruminating as well. Do you have these sort of toxic friends who all the time just worry with you and make you more worried? And call it when it happens in a conversation, change the topic. So just have that awareness of what you're thinking and what you're talking about and how that's influencing your mood. And here's some other tips about maximizing your capacity to cope. We all know these: healthy food, watch the sugar, the alcohol, and the caffeine. Physical activity is going to really help us. So if you see that you've starting to get a mental health problem, a lot of us want to get counselling that's going to fix us, but just think about whether the base is right. Are we getting enough good food? Are we getting enough sleep? Are we getting enough exercise? And sometimes sleep can be part of the problem too. So we might have to live for a time with less sleep than we would like. Modify your expectations as well. Life's not going to be normal. We're not going to be able to do the things we want to do. There's going to be a bit of pressure. So we might need to have to shift those goals a bit. Establish our core values. I always come back to that. What are we about? What gives us meaning? That's what we need to focus on. There's other things that are out there that are important, but we really need to prioritize those. Problem solve, set achievable goals. And the mindfulness thing is about accepting those unhelpful emotions when they come. And it's about stepping back and thinking, how am I feeling right now? So it can be sitting with like a recording in the background where we sit and watch our thoughts. It's not about trying to remove all those thoughts. It's really just being really aware of what we're doing in that moment and aware of what we're thinking and how that makes us feel and where our thoughts go. And it can be quite a really interesting process the first time we do it, because we realize we have very little control over those thoughts. They come, they go. But acknowledging that they are just thoughts, that's really important. And we can tell ourselves that then. And the more we practice it, the more we'll be able to use it in our everyday lives. So that whenever a negative thought comes, we can say, that's a negative thought. It might not be true though. It's just a thought. And then get rid of it and think of something else. So mindfulness gives us that level of control over our thoughts. And our thoughts cause our feelings, and our feelings will cause our moods and our behaviours. So that's a really good thing to get in the way of. And it can even just be like brushing our teeth in the morning. That's kind of when I do it. I'm thinking about the feeling of the toothbrush in my mouth, and what does it feel like, and is the water cold, and the taste. And that's bringing me back into the moment, because when I'm doing that, I'm not thinking about the other problems that I have. So that focus is good, because that gets us away from fight or flight, because we're just brushing our teeth then. We're not fighting a virus. So it helps us have control and regain control and power over these things. So refocus our attention on activities that are aligned with our core values, instead of worrying about what the government are doing, or who did what, or who's adhering to what rules. Thinking about, well, what am I about? What are my core values? The daily routine is really important for all of us. Getting up in time, at a time, knowing what we're doing, what we're eating at different times. And hopefully we are in a bit of a routine now, but that might shift again when the schools go back. But thinking about that, a routine, and maintaining that. So even if we don't feel like getting up, get out of bed, have a shower. Things always shift and change when we get up and eat and have a glass of water and have a shower. So the routine is really essential, trying to keep the same bedtime and the same rising time. Think about what has worked for us in the past and increasing that. Think about things that we've got through before, and how we coped then, and what we did, and who helped us and what didn't help us. That can be really, really useful. And finally, thinking about those thoughts. Cognitive restructuring. Is that thought true? This is a terrible time, but there's also good parts to this. And I can get through this. I've got through other things. So attending to our self-talk, using mindfulness approaches to help us work out what our self-talk is. What are we ruminating about? What's going on in our head? What is the TV screen in our brain telling us? And then saying, right, do we need to change the channel here? Is there any way we can put on something that's a bit more uplifting? And even literally music, art, all of those things can help us shift our mood and help focus us on the beauty and the joy of life, which will get us through this. So for the last wee part of this, I'm going to introduce a technique that I found really, really helpful, and this is called the bag of stones. So the bag of stones it's a good one, because it's about that bag of worries, of all the problems that we have, that we carry about with us, and there's more stones in there now because of a virus on top of everything else. And this is about trying to identify what those stones represent. So emptying out that bag and naming each stone. So what is this worry? What are the specific things that I'm concerned about that's causing me these awful feelings? If we were to write that down, what would it be? What would the name of it be? And then we have to divide it into 3 piles, divide the stones into 3 piles. And I would actually suggest writing them down and trying to categorize where they fit. Or you can get somebody to help you, and that's where therapy and stuff can be useful, but you can do it yourself as well. So there are things that I really have control over, which is things that I put into my mouth. So what I eat, what I drink, sometimes what I do of the day, but not necessarily that either. And there's things I can influence. So if I'm worried, like I've awful worry at the minute about my child's teeth. Teeth are a theme here. So things I can influence, I can brush her teeth. Can I influence whether Granny brings her sweets or not? That's a difficult one, right? So things I can influence, and then things that are outside of my control. And when we're thinking about a virus and protecting ourselves, we really have control over washing our hands, over wearing a mask, and whether we do things and whether we interact with people. We can influence what other people can do, but we can't change other people's behaviours. And we have very little influence over what the government does and what experts recommend and what happens to the virus and second waves and third waves and all of that. So we need to look at that bag of stones and work out what it is we have control over, and then what we're going to do to control that. And getting that sense of control is very, very important. For me, having to work from home was really difficult, and I was sitting at the kitchen table and it was just terrible, and the child was in the background. So I did up a nice office for myself and rearranged things up here so that I have control over that, and that gave me a really good feeling of satisfaction that at least I've got a nice office space, and I bought a new computer screen and all. So just that some parts of that were a bit easier. So think about what you can control, what you can influence, and what's outside of your control, and you will have to dump that bag, and that can be very painful. And sometimes things that are outside of the control are losses that we have and that we have to bear, and we will be depressed for a while with that, and acknowledge that's normal too. But sometimes it's just about giving ourselves a good talking to, and saying, actually, that's not something I can do anything about, and I can ruminate about that, and it's harming me. So let's just leave that to the side, and actually goals, committed action towards those goals. This is a slide on PTSD that we don't have time for. Okay, so the last little bit now is about growth. Can we really grow after trauma? And there's a lot of debate about this, and the pressure to grow after a trauma is something that a lot of us will just say, no, this is too much. Actually, I've been wounded, I've been hurt. I don't want to grow, I don't need to grow. Let's just be where we are. So the possibility of growth is how I would describe post-traumatic growth, rather than saying that growth is a necessity. But I believe we can grow, and we can grow out of horrible negative experiences. And there's so many examples of that in Northern Ireland that it really is worth talking about. So flourishing as a result of trauma or grief, or flourishing in a pandemic. So first of all, there's no requirement to grow, obviously, but we can learn a lot from this. We can listen to what has affected us and how it has affected us. And when we start to really think about this, the results can be really, really interesting. And I really have learned that my relationship with my child is everything, and it's deepened, and I know her in a different way now because I've been at home with her, and because I've had that day-to-day contact through the day, and that's been really, really valuable. And I can see what has affected me and how I perceive key workers and even people in shops. I have this just amazing respect for people who work behind the counter in shops, who are exposing themselves to a virus, and that's what they did in order to make sure that we had food, and the respect that we would have for them. So what has affected us and how? And I've been saddened by what's happened in care homes, and I think we need to all learn, from that too. So record, give ourselves space to reflect. We also need to listen to our physical responses too, that neuroception. What did trigger stuff within us? What were those things? What can we learn? What connections can we make about our childhood, for example? Have we learned anything about ourselves that's valuable as a result of this? And it comes back again to re-establishing those core values. Has there been a shift there? I think culturally and socially, well, certainly over the first few weeks, I thought that there were good changes to core values and clapping for carers. That was lovely. And I really desperately wanted that translated into some sort of amazing pay deal for carers, which would have been a great reward, and that didn't happen. And thinking about other key workers, and now the debate about face masks, I think, is rather sad, because we need to understand that that's about protecting other people and about valuing other people, particularly vulnerable people. But can we set new goals? Can we find new meanings? I certainly at one stage set a new goal about not working so much, about not being on the road so much. And then I was offered this amazing role of mental health champion. I thought, actually, that's a better goal. You know, I think I can do this. I need to keep myself unsafe and social here to do it. You know, I can't be acting from a place of fight or flight all the time. So that self-care is a really important part of my job, and taking time out when it's needed, and all of that will allow me to do that role in a better way. So new goals, finding meanings, all of that. And there's so many examples that I've seen, and people have found new ways of working, new ways of helping their families, new ways of helping other people, and even helping people in their own workplace. That's been incredible too. So those new goals and new meanings have been good. So what have we learned already? Here's some ideas that I've come up with. Money can be found, right? So that's a good one going into the role of mental health champion. Money can be found. Money was found to furlough people. Money was found to pay for food packages for people. Money was found for all sorts of things there now. So we know we can get the money. We always knew, by the way, that we could get money to bail out bankers and stuff like that. So we know we can get money to help vulnerable people. Let's just hold that moving forward. Populations can adapt. We're very flexible, and we adapted really quickly. There's a theory called the hedonic treadmill that states that no matter what happens to us, we could win the lottery or we could have the most awful trauma. We'll probably go back to the same level of happiness afterwards. So we can adapt, and we're flexible, and that baseline level of happiness will probably still always be there. Innovation is certainly possible. We've produced online courses in a record time. I wouldn't want to stand over the quality necessarily, but we've found in education certainly that innovation is possible. Social agency is possible. Individuals can create huge changes. We saw what happened with a guy who decided he wanted to help the NHS and did a sponsored walk around his garden, and Captain Thomas now famous for that, and it's an amazing thing. So individuals can make huge change. The solidarity we felt has been incredible. The connections that we felt, that we're in this together. I've used that phrase and genuinely got a lot from other people using it when they were talking to me, so that's a good thing. Science can guide progress. As an academic, I would say that. And as a scientist, I just think it's so important that we're recognizing the benefit of the knowledge of the research we produce, not just for how we contain and adapt to a virus, but even in terms of mental health. The science is at an early stage, so we need so much more there, on treatments, on the best way to help people, because we're still not there. So I think we need a lot more science in mental health. But the things that we thought were impossible, like getting all the homeless into accommodation, a few nights that was made possible. So let's try and harness these things as we move forward. And I'm naturally probably quite optimistic, but I am acknowledging that there's a negative side to all of this as well, because we're thinking, well, why could the money not be found before? Why were scientists not listened to when they talked about the risk of a pandemic? So there's always a negative spin on each one of these, but there are enormous positives and enormous gifts that this pandemic potentially has brought us. So one of the key things we need to think about now is which parts of this are we going to retain, and how are we going to make sure that we don't lose all of these lessons as we move back to what people are calling the new normal, which won't be like the old normal. And let's hope it's not got all those negative things that the old normal had for us. So that is the end of my lecture today. I hope you found that in some way useful, and I would be delighted to take questions and even comments either now in the Q&A session or afterwards. If you want to contact me by email or on Twitter or whatever, I'd like to think that I can be quite open and respond to things and respond to your suggestions. Thank you.